The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today Scott and I will be having a conversation reflecting back on January 6, 2021, the events of that day, the consequences to many who participated in the insurrection on that day, and a look at some of the candidates that are be running in 2024 to federal office. What does it say about the American electorate as we await the vote of 2024? So let's listen in. So what else was on your mind?
Well, you mentioned Peter Navarro. And,
Peter Navarro.
Well, I mean, Peter Navarro is the latest victim of Trump, right? Who to pay a price that Trump himself will not pay. And Peter Navarro seems in denial about that. He kind of said yesterday he evoked a reporter asked him if he's heard from Trump, and he said, "I'm going to keep that on executive privilege," which is really,
yeah.
Which once again, Peter, doesn't apply here, as it didn't the first time. But hey, he's willing to go to prison, and this morning, Peter Navarro heard the lions roar, as I understand it. This prison that he's in is right next door to a zoo where there are a lot of lions, and in the morning the lions all roar. So he heard the lions roar. But I don't want to focus on Peter Navarro, but another victim, because I read something today that I had not seen before. And it came from Liz Cheney. And Liz Cheney wrote or said to somebody, I read it. While the attack was happening, this is on January 6th, 2021. While the attack was happening, he was handed a note. The note said, a civilian had been shot. That's Ashley Babbitt.
Yep.
He put the note on the table in front of him, and he continued to watch the attack. That's depravity. And that person could never be near the Oval Office again. So Ashley Babbitt was tragically killed, I would argue, by believing Trump's lies. Because she was a QAnon adherent or victim or whatever, however you want to characterize that. And that Ashley Babbitt was one of the victims. And I don't know where Liz Cheney got this story from, but there were plenty of people around. But think about how callous that was. He's handed a note, and somebody in the Capitol had been killed. A civilian had been killed. And he just puts it down and goes back to watching TV. That is simply off the next level charts crazy.
Yeah. It just also goes to show that the only thing he's interested in is himself. And right. I am sure the first, and again, I can't say this with any qualification of it. I'm sure that when he looked at it, his first thought was, "This is good for me."
Yeah,
I can.
Right.
Wow, what a spin I could make on this one. And they did. And the only thing I would to push back a little bit on, yes, Ashley Babbitt was a victim, and it was a victim because she basically drank the Kool-Aid and was a QAnon supporter, and she fell for the lies, and she fell into the cult. No doubt about it. Peter Navarro, he did it. I don't see him as a victim because he truly believes this stuff. Just as Paul Manafort, who was also back in the news this week. He went in eyes wide open, totally eyes wide open, as opposed to Ashley Babbitt. The idea of the people that were convicted so far on January 6th, and then now the hostages. That's such a stupid thing to say.
Awful.
Absolutely stupid and terrible thing to say. They're not hostages, they're criminals. Many of those people that were convicted did so with their eyes wide open. They did not believe anything. That all it was violence for the sake of violence. That's all it was. Were there people there that have drank the Kool-Aid? Yep. You see them all the time when they're interviewed. But these were not people. Many of them were not people that drank the Kool-Aid. These were people that went into this with only one purpose and one purpose alone, and that was anarchy. That was to disrupt, in many ways to kill. The guy that just got sentenced the other day with a gun, shooting it in the air.
Right.
I mean, you don't take a gun if you don't think you're going to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And the use of it is not to protect democracy. That's not what he was there, simply for the purpose of anarchy for anarchy's sake. And those are not victims. Ashley Babbitt, again, it's been so long. I don't know her full story, but I can say that, again, there were many people there that did adhere to this stuff because, for whatever reason, and it's still beyond so many of us as to how you fall into this cultish kind of thing. But there were equally as many, if not more, those oath keepers on the other side of the Potomac that were sitting there waiting. They're not there to protect democracy. They're there to shoot something. That's what they're there for.
And to overthrow the government of the United States of America, which Ashley Babbitt was there to do. Ashley Babbitt has this in common with a lot of January 6th people who pleaded guilty, that she got carried away. Yep. The mob mentality took over.
Yep.
She lost her self-interest. She lost her mind. They got carried away. They got swept into the excitement of it all. And no matter how many times she was warned to step back and get away from the door, she just kept coming. I think that her death is a tragedy.
Yep.
I wish that it had never happened. I wish that the person who pulled the trigger didn't feel he had to pull the trigger, but I don't think that he felt he had any other choice. If she got through the window there, got into the room itself, and other people followed through, who knows what might have happened and the violence that could have occurred. The whole thing is tragic. It's all about that one guy. It's all about this person who was so indifferent to her death that he just kept watching. It's so, they had footage the other day of the people who constructed the gallows there,
mm-hmm.
who began doing that at 6 o'clock in the morning. Those people were not there getting carried away. They went there carried away. And it's different. So there's there's every bit of nuance in there that you can have, I think, when you're dealing with individuals who then become a mob, who then, the mob just takes over, that mentality takes over. And we've seen that before. And that's certainly what happened with a lot of people that day. But there were people who had seriously bad intent. And as you mentioned, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and so on, which was to make Donald Trump an unelected dictator of the United States of America. You mentioned Manafort.
Yes.
And Manafort possibly coming back. In fact, he has never left. He is still the head of Event Strategies, a company that he had formed that still gets tens of millions of dollars in dark money got it in 2020. Was the organizers of the January 6th rally. Their Event Strategies is the company that got the permits that organized the entire thing. So Paul Manafort is a specter hanging over January 6th in a real big way. But I was struck by what Richard Burr, who's a Republican from North Carolina, if you remember, retired now, the chair of the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee, a conservative to his marrow. Okay, he and I would never agree on a single thing. And his report, their report, which came out just months after the election, said that Paul Manafort represented a grave counterintelligence threat by creating opportunities for Russian intelligence services to exert influence over and acquire confidential information on the Trump campaign. Richard Burr said of Paul Manafort and of Russia, one of the committee's most important and overlooked findings is that much of Russia's activities weren't related to producing a specific electoral outcome, but attempted to undermine our faith in the democratic process itself. Their aim is to sow chaos, discord, and distrust. Their efforts are not limited to elections, and their threat is ongoing. That is Richard Burr, former chair of the Senate Bipartisan Intelligence Committee, and his report. Manafort being back on the scene should really make voters nervous that the opening is going to be there for Russian mob influence on our election, done with Russian intelligence, which should not ever be underestimated, and that we really need to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah. And keeping in mind that Burr was a Republican.
Right.
So this is,
North Carolina.
this is just as we were saying about the people that brought up the case in Colorado. Oh, they're Republicans. They weren't the Democrats. They weren't Joe Biden. They were the Republicans. And it's kind of funny to me that and that's why whenever somebody says, well, you've got the Trumpists, I don't see them as Republicans, even though they identify with them as Republicans. There's something totally different. The problem is they've drowned out those more sensible, and there are sensible Republicans still that exist out there. Again, Liz Cheney, I wouldn't probably agree with anything that she says policy-wise, but to me, Kingzer, I can never get his name. I can never put his name out there. Kingzer, Kingings, yeah, whatever. Yeah, it just does not roll off my tongue. Thank goodness I wasn't named that. I would probably not agree with a lot of his policies, even though he's a little bit more moderate than Cheney is. But the fact is that I can look at them and I could say, you make the argument, and you make the argument in a logical way, in political discourse that's the way it's supposed to be made, and you are not insane. You are not Space Laser Lady. You are not Matt Gaetz. You are not any of these people that just are totally off the wall. You are not the people they interview at Trump rallies who, if presented with a very simple question, simply cannot answer it. Again, it's just there's such a divide. That's the problem the Republicans truly have, but it's a problem of their own making. They let it in because there was a short-term benefit for letting this in. Once they got him out, they still thought that we can't win, and they're probably right. We can't win without that base that he's got. We need them too. So it was the deal with the devil, and just like everything else, the bill comes due. And I think the bill is starting to come due for the Republicans because, they may get back to Senate. In fact, they probably will. I think that the Republicans, especially because West Virginia, there's no way a Democrat's going to win in West Virginia. And then the other one was Montana. That's going to be a tough one for them to take. Sherrod Brown in Ohio. The hope is
can we talk about that a second?
absolutely. Go ahead.
We have time for one more.
We got time for yes.
Interesting topic here.
Yes. I don't have to be in office hours until 1:30, so I'm good. What do you got? So Sherrod Brown, yeah.
Right. Sherrod Brown's the incumbent. He's a Democrat. He's running he's run tough races, you know.
Yeah.
Ohio is a tough place for a Democrat to run, and he's managed to win. He's very popular there. I think his father was very popular there. Kind of goes back. I don't know whether that's going to hold sway. But yesterday was the Ohio primary, and we have a winner of the Ohio U.S. Senate candidates from the Republican Party, and that is a fellow named Bernie Moreno.
So not the Trump guy.
He is the Trump guy.
Oh, he is the Trump guy. Okay.
Bernie Moreno was the Trump guy. The more moderate candidate, who's still way, way to the right, who is endorsed by the governor there, Governor DeWine, lost to this guy, Bernie Moreno. Okay, so Bernie Moreno is a very, very interesting human being. At one point in his life, Bernie Moreno was a very pro-LGBTQ businessman. In 2014, Cleveland and Akron won the right to host the gay games, the 2014 gay games, which is an Olympic type international competition featuring LGBTQ athletes. Moreno owns an auto dealership company, was a financial sponsor of that, and wrote an opinion article for Crane's Cleveland Business. A successful gay games would go a long way towards boosting our image as cities that welcome all, he wrote. They need help to put them on. Hosting a complex multi-venue event requires a network of financial supporters and volunteers. It must be a community effort. He continued on to urge gay and transgender students at Cleveland State University to fight back against a campaign that had gone on there. This is disgusting. I'm sorry. To urge gay and transgender students to commit suicide. And Moreno is a chairman of the school's board of trustees at Cleveland State, wrote that the signer of the letter needed to be condemned for signing a abhorrent message, an attack on our entire campus, whether you were straight or gay. He has a gay son, says he loves him. He really seemed to be an open-minded guy, pro-LGBTQ. And yet, in order to have Trump support him, has come out hard against gay rights. Complete 180. Okay? Yeah. So now you have a candidate running for the U.S. Senate from Ohio who has accused advocates for LGBTQ rights of advancing a radical agenda, indoctrination, grooming, the whole thing. He was endorsed by Ohio Value Voters, right? A group that opposes same-sex marriage and other things. The other two candidates, he both said, were supporters of this radical trans agenda. He went full MAGA on gay rights. And Donald Trump Jr. told Ohio voters that he has no doubt that the real conservative is Bernie Moreno over left-wing, pro-trans Frank LaRose. Here's the thing. A couple of weeks ago, it was revealed on social media that Bernie Moreno, whose first name is Bernardo, had signed up a profile on Adult Friend Finder, which is a website for people seeking casual sexual encounters, under the category men for one-to-one sex. And that Nardo 19672 is looking for young guys to have fun with while he's traveling.
Oh boy.
Now, somebody with access to his email account created that profile. It has only been accessed a couple of times. The last time was 6 hours after it was created. The profile lists Moreno's correct date of birth and geolocation data, says that the account was set up for use in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where property records show that his parents owned a home at that time. Moreno came out with a statement saying that it was a prank perpetrated by an intern on his staff named Dan Ritchie, who said that he created the account as part of a juvenile prank. This came from a statement that the campaign put out, not from Dan Ritchie himself. The statement says that Dan Ritchie, who had been an intern and a friend of Moreno, said he created the prank. He created the account as part of a prank. However, I think probably most people would be somewhat skeptical about that, and that the press would probably like to speak to Dan Ritchie in person to discuss this matter further. And I only bring it up not because I am against gay men seeking gay sex. As long as you're of age, more power to you. Go for it. But this idea that we see again and again and again of the most virulent haters of gay people being gay themselves. Another closeted gay man in the GOP shouting down rights for LGBTQ.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Yeah, the hypocrisy is truly amazing. And it really is hard to try to, sort through why they're so hypocritical. I understand it's for political gain. But, as you said, Moreno has a son that's gay. How must that son feel?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a great point, because all of a sudden his dad's out there, yelling anti-LGBTQ stuff, and where he's always been supportive of his son before that.
I mean, that's just no political office is worth your children. I mean, to me, it's unfathomable that, if one of my daughters came home and said, "Hey, I'm gay," okay. One of the boys, if they were to come home and say, "I'm gay," okay. Again, it doesn't matter. It
Right.
just, it was not wasn't a big deal. It just, but now here's a guy who has been supportive of gay rights, and now he's against it, and he's got a son that's gay. I mean, that kid has got to be like, what? Who are you? Were were you bullshitting then, or are you bullshitting now?
Yeah, I mean, there's no core there,
No, there isn't.
and
No,
the only thing that's there is ambition.
and that's all there is to it. And I do know that, just watching the news the other day about when they were waiting for the results of the primary, the Democrats want Moreno to be the guy. They
Right.
want him.
He's the worst. He's the crazy candidate. We were talking last week
Yep.
about getting crazy candidates.
Yep.
Get out the vote for the. Yeah, I believe that Sherrod Brown may have actually contributed to his campaign.
I think. Well, they were saying that the Democrats had boosted up Moreno to get him in, because the third guy was, I think, the Secretary of State was also
Secretary
running.
of State, a state senator, and this guy who's a businessman.
And it was the state senator that DeWine backed, I believe.
I think it was, Dolan.
Yeah, and the Secretary of State, nobody did. But yeah, they were kind of hoping for Moreno to get in there. Well, now they've got what they want. And I think that Ohio looks a little bit safer today than it did yesterday.
Yeah, I guess that was the point, right?
Yeah.
Is that sometimes you can get the candidate that you need to run against.
Exactly. So, yeah, exactly.
So Carrie Lake in Arizona versus Ruben Gallego, with what's her name dropping out, Cinema dropping out altogether. Hopefully we'll have a few more of these and we might even be able. Oh, Mud! Hear him? He's whining he's sleeping next to me. He's having a bad dream.
Oh,
good. Maybe it's a good dream. He's
maybe it's good. Yeah, maybe he's dreaming. Who knows?
Chasing the rabbits.
Yeah, I mean, again, the two that with Ohio, with the news about Ohio, now the two we really has to be watching are West Virginia, which I think is a foregone conclusion.
Right.
That's done.
West Virginia's done.
West Virginia's done. Montana, see how that goes. But that still means
I think Florida, maybe.
Maybe. There's been talk Texas.
Right.
They're actually talking Texas.
Ted Cruz versus
Ted Cruz is vulnerable. So again, if we know they're going to lose West Virginia, even if they keep Montana, now they're still in the minority.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to keep it. They need to flip seats, right? Whether it's in Texas or Florida or both. Both disgusting human beings, Ted Cruz and Rick Scott. And there's a war chest for the Democrats. There's not much of one because the war chest for the Republicans are going to Donald Trump's legal bills, not the senators.
Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, especially in the Senate. I think the House of Representatives, I think that's a foregone conclusion. I think the Democrats take the House just because of how bad the House has been with the Republicans in charge. Now the only question is MAGA Mike going to be able to survive until the end? Good question there. Who knows?
But I tell you, the Elise Stefanik in your old district, we've discussed her before.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. There were reports during COVID that Jared Kushner had gone to Trump and said, hey, you know what? Most of the deaths that are happening now are happening in blue states like New York. And why don't we just let them happen? It's good for us because the Governor Cuomo will be the one who gets blamed for this. So it's politically good for us. And they made the decision to not help blue states get the equipment that they needed in order to get the equipment you needed at that time. You really needed to pay homage to Trump, right? And if you remember, one of the great things about the governor of Maryland, Dolan, was Hogan, was that he got his wife his wife's connections in Korea, had a plane load of special equipment flown to them in Maryland. But I was thinking the other day about this, and I've hammered her a few times on social media. How can you represent New York or New Jersey, for that matter, or any of the other blue states that were affected by this, when the person that you're supporting literally was okay with citizens of your state being killed, dying of COVID? They were okay. They felt that was collateral damage and nothing else, and that they should withhold support from them, or at least say, hey, look, it's up to every state to themselves. We're not using federal equipment to stock your states. We're going to use them for ourselves and give them to, whatever red states, I suppose, or whose governors were aligned with Trump they got that equipment, where the action, unfortunately, was in New York, where we had freezer trucks outside of hospitals, freezing dead bodies in them before they could be buried and so on. And Elise Stefanik represents a district in New York. I find that almost as hypocritical, maybe even as hypocritical, maybe even more hypocritical than this guy Moreno in Ohio and his personal proclivities, sexual habits.
Well, the only thing I would say to that is, whenever we talk about New York, we call New York's a blue state because Democrats usually win. However, the only reason the Democrats win is because of New York City. And there's a couple of pockets in there. Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse is probably purple. Albany is probably blue. Binghamton and the Finger Lakes area where I'm from, totally red. Totally red. Where Stefanik represents, totally red.
Yeah, but I mean,
and the fact is that but the majority of deaths in New York were in the city. That's where you saw the freezer trucks and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, the comment of, just let them die and decrease the surplus population, as Ebenezer Scrooge would say, you're killing off those Democrats down in the city. Were there people that died in upstate New York? Absolutely. Yes, there were. Was it as prevalent as it was in the city? No. Stefanik's area is a red area, probably, and is a rural area, relatively rural. So it wasn't as big an impact there as it was down in the city. And again, that's to me, that does make it bad because it's such a calculated statement to make. We know the deaths are going to be in the city, which is what makes New York a blue state. It's okay. That is so calculated. Pennsylvania, again, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Those are your blue areas. A little bit kind of purple when you talk about Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. Harrisburg's definitely red, but the rest of the state is fairly red. Is all red. It's these large cities that the attitude is let the cities die. The virus is going to go through the cities faster anyway than it will in rural area. Let them die. Let them die and be over and done with. We reduce their population, therefore we reduce the amount of voters that are there. That is, to me, a sickening calculation.
Absolutely. And listen to me, voters out there. Listen to us.
Yes.
Please take this into consideration.
Absolutely. Take it all into consideration. Because, back then they were talking about the peoples of the cities. Eventually they're going to talk about you.
Right.
Eventually they come knocking on your door, whether you like it or whether you don't. Well, Scott, always good to talk to you, as always.
Thank you very much, sir. Always a pleasure.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.